Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our concluding panel, our headline panel of this year's Welcoming Week 2021. We have had an extraordinary week, and an extraordinary week deserves an extraordinary concluding crescendo. And so I'm going to be introducing our panel very shortly. But first, what I'd like to do is thank everyone for their incredible participation in Welcoming Week this year and for everything that everyone did to help make this week the success that it is and that it was. I'd also like to thank our sponsors. It's really important that we recognize the people who help make this possible. I'd like to thank the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Water Department, Italian Tours and Travel by Diana, the K&D Group, United Church of Christ, Katney's Classics, the City of Shaker Heights, Cleveland State University, Cuyahoga Community College, Cuyahoga County Public Library, Dealer Tire, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Greater Cleveland Partnership, the 2021 Cleveland Marathon brought to you by Union Home Mortgage on October 23rd and 24th through Jack Staff, RPM, Swagelock, Welcome House Incorporated, Platform Brewery, Medical Mutual, AMS, Mitchell's Ice Cream, the Cleveland Transformation Alliance, Grants Plus, Mansour Gavin Law, Margaret W. Wong and Associates Law, Midtown Cleveland, Neighborhood Family Practice, the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, the Cleveland Foundation, the City of Cleveland, and Cuyahoga County. As this is the concluding event, I'd also like to thank our outstanding board. We are led by a great leader named David Fleschler, the Vice Provost of International Affairs at Case Western. We have other board members on this session today, and I want to thank each and every one of them for their participation and their leadership. I'd also be remiss here on the crowning event of Welcoming Week if I didn't thank Nancy Janis, Supriya Tamang, Elizabeth Kuzma, Colin Derrick, Rosarita DeMillo, Allison Redder, Melissa Berth-Biles, Gwendolyn Kocher, Fatima Rahman, and William Whirling, our amazing team of people who actually make all the good things happen. We have today during Welcoming Week some fantastic speakers, but if I could just share something that just speaks to the relevance of this conversation, and that is our governor announced yesterday that Northeast Ohio would soon be the home for over 400 people coming from Afghanistan in the first segment of people from Afghanistan who are being relocated in the United States. The number in the United States total is 37,000. Ohio got close to 1,000, and we in Northeast Ohio are getting just over 400 people, and that's just the beginning. So there couldn't be something, I think, more poignant and important and relevant during Welcoming Week than saying hello and welcome to our sisters and brothers from Afghanistan. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone who's watching this, how excited we are that they will be a part of the Cleveland community. Our speakers today will be talking about something that was released this week, a study by Rust Belt Analytica, Migration is Economic Development. It is an important study. It shares the truth and the metrics and the facts of why migration and immigration is so absolutely vital to our community, to Cleveland, to Cuyahoga County, to all of her residents, foreign-born or native-born, people who are from the city, people who come into the city, and for the greater good of our entire community. I'd like to introduce our first speaker, and someone who has been one of the founders of Global Cleveland, whose thought leadership is known throughout the United States and the world, Mr. Richey Piiparinen. Richey is with Rust Belt Analytica. He is the Director of Urban Theory and Analytics at Cleveland State University. His focus is cultural, psychosocial, and demographic changes in Rust Belt cities, particularly as they relate to economic and community development. Richey holds a Master's of Arts in Clinical Psychology from Roosevelt University in Chicago and a Master's of Urban Planning and Design and Development from Cleveland State University. Richey is one of the authors of our plan. Welcome, Richey. Thank you for joining. Our next speaker is Mr. Jim Russell, also of Rust Belt Analytica and a co-founder of Rust Belt Analytica. Jim is a geographer studying the relationship between migration and economic development. And if you want to hear Jim even more after today's session, tune in to Jenny Hamill and the Sound of Ideas WCPN. Yesterday, they did a phenomenal segment of this study and what it means. And Jim was answering quite a few questions. And as somebody who's read this study over and over, I learned a lot of things from Jim's presentation. So thank you, Jim. Our next presenter today is Mr. John Grabowski, who is known to all Clevelanders. He is the Associate Professor of History at Case Western Reserve University. John holds a joint position at Case Western Reserve University and the Western Reserve Historical Society. He served as a Fulbright scholar in Turkey. His fields of interest are immigration and ethnicity, public history, museums and memory. And I dare anyone to find somebody who has more insight into why Cleveland is Cleveland than John Grabowski. I had the thrill of spending some time with him, and you're going to see a little bit of that right before we get into our speakers on an RTA bus. Thank you, Regional Transit Authority, for showing us Cleveland, and through John's eyes, talking about all the different people and the cultures and the nations that formed Cleveland for who she is. John, you are a jewel, and we're grateful for you. And our final speaker is a dear friend of Global Cleveland, Leen Ajlouni from North Coast Ventures. She is an investment associate. Leen is Cleveland-based, works with North Coast Ventures, a Cleveland-based venture capital firm with 6 contributed funds that are comprised of 300 investors, entrepreneurs, business people dedicated to accelerating early stage ventures. In her role at NCV, Leen plays point on sourcing and screening investment opportunities, managing the due diligence process for evaluating the top deals, and supporting NCV's portfolio of 40+ active companies. Leen is joining us today from the wonderful country of Jordan, and she'll talk a little bit about that. But before we get to our first questions for our speakers, could we play a little bit of that video that I referenced a little bit earlier?
Today, people, refugees come to Cleveland because they can't go back. This group that comes to Cleveland are the Irish. Stop here just for a second because this is incredible. Taking this bus ride through Cleveland from the east side to the west side just allowed us to touch on so many topics. We love to watch people dance. We love to eat their food. We love them.
Thank you, John Grabowski, for your amazing Rick Steves-like presentation. I'd like to start this panel with a quick question, first to Richey and then Jim. In the plan that was discussed, the study that was discussed from Rust Belt Analytica, a city's economic vitality is directly tied to its ability to innovate. Also, a diverse population is directly tied to the ability to attract newcomers to the region, whether from across the United States or around the world. Richey and Jim, could you please tell me, how is Cleveland doing with the premise to the study that you've proposed?
Well, in the study, we use actually some metaphors to make it a little bit simpler. And we say cities affect globalization and cities are affected by globalization. And the metaphor we use is they're both vessels of globalization. So they catch globalization through investment, through outside investment, through the migration of entrepreneurs and migrants, through laborers, through ideas. So these are vessels. And they're engines of globalization. So all these inputs from globalization that come into Cleveland, they make the place a special place. There's knowledge production activities that happen within Cleveland, and those knowledge production activities kick off innovation, and they then affect globalization back out. And Cleveland, I mean, how is it doing? I mean, we were, and John can get into this, we were epicenters of immigrant populations during the Industrial Revolution. As we industrialized, obviously, or deindustrialized, we became less vessels. And that's simply through economic transformation. That's through economic restructuring. Now we're coming on the other side of this restructuring into a knowledge economy, and our immigrant population, while not as big, its composition is highly educated. One of the stats we have in the report is Cleveland is 8th in the concentration of immigrants with an advanced degree. And when you look at the top 10, it's not just Cleveland, it's St. Louis, it's Pittsburgh, it's Detroit. So it's a lot of these Rust Belt cities that get left behind or become afterthoughts when you think of where success is and when the future is. And that's what we did in the report. We unpack the numbers and we say, hold on to your biases. Your biases are from a bygone era, and there's a lot of emerging stats that we're going to uncover. That's kind of what we showed with Cleveland. It's an emerging area with some emerging stats.
Thanks, Richey. Jim, one of the things that Richey touched on was innovation. And he talked a little bit about when Cleveland, and he referenced John Grabowski's work as an immigrant city. We know that, around the 1910 and 1920 decade, over 40% of the community was speaking a language other than English first. Can you talk a little bit about that innovation, Jim, and how we're doing here in Cleveland, right? We're not the steel city we once were. We've got this medical complex, this medical industry. We've got a lot of other things that are going on. How are we doing as we transition across the decades?
So, I think an important thing to understand is, Richey touched on this, in the economic restructuring. When a place is, at the center of an emergent economic era, so like manufacturing, it's attractive. And meaning that people who want to work will move there. And so you have international migration, you have domestic migration, happening in those places that are standing at the bow wave of the economic transformation. And, so Cleveland was that place in the early 20th century. And then things move, so instead of say steel production, we have automobile production. So then Detroit is that place. And then from there, we have, the Silicon era. And so California, Silicon Valley becomes that place. And so we see where immigrants go change over time. And, so the places that were of a bygone era, that people stop moving there. And in fact, what's really interesting is that people also stop leaving. So the focus is that, everyone's leaving, things aren't going well. It's actually the opposite. The places that are doing really well and at the bow wave are very dynamic, and there's lots of people leaving. And so Cleveland, has to look at where is the economic bow wave and what kind of migrants are tied to that. So it's not holding on to the people, it's the people you're attracting. And so the medical research, the medical services and things like that are attracting immigrants, but it's just a different kind of industry to manufacturing where you need lots of people, lots of bodies. This is a case where you need high quality minds. So it's not necessarily lots of minds, but it's what they can bring to the table. And, in that regard, Cleveland actually does really well, better than a lot of places in the United States.
Thanks so much, Jim. You brought something up that I want to highlight, and you talked about it as migration creating global connections, the pipelines for exchange of information, commerce, and community. I'm wondering, John Grabowski, if you could talk a little bit about that idea, knowing that Cleveland has been this welcoming place for well over 100 nations from all over the world. What is it actually like on the ground? What does that mean between the Irish and the Congolese and the people from El Salvador? What does that really look like in Cleveland to what this plan is talking about in terms of what we need?
Well, I think what we're looking at, Joe, is this. It's the same scenario over time, and I think Jim and Richey alluded to this, that the city's economy has grown by in-migration. If you want to be simplistic about it, that when this city was established, this was Native American territory, and as it grew and the economy changed, it drew people in who came with ideas. So if we're looking at 19th century Cleveland, let me just go in the past for a while, and we're looking at the development of technologies. A lot of that's coming in from immigrants and migrants. Henry Chisholm, who was the iron master of Cleveland, was born in Scotland, came in. So you can do this, and then you have what we have now. You have people who worked in these industries, and they would come in and they would work. And we don't look at a fully stable population. Immigration and migration, move people in and out. So if you if you look at immigrant histories in the 19th century, you'll find a large return rate to Europe. We'll find a lot of movement across the United States. They're going to where the jobs are. And that on the ground really creates these neighborhoods that we still see vestiges of some of the old neighborhoods. It's exactly the same thing we're seeing now. And I think that's what Jim and Richey are relating to. And my vantage point for that is here on the campus of Case Western Reserve University. Now, we certainly have a large cadre of international students, but if I look at the faculty, both in medicine and in the sciences, a lot of the faculty are of what we would call the post-World War II immigrant groups, the new movement. So that's what's driving the inventiveness that comes on this campus, comes out of CSU, comes out of other campuses, and that's carrying it. And that will bring in practitioners. And the story I always tell about practitioners is that when the United States passed Medicare in the mid-1960s, we didn't have enough doctors and nurses to fulfill that. And the new immigration law allowed people to come in if they had job skills that no American could match. And that began to internationalize medicine. And my story is that my mother's final illness was at a place called the Slavic Village Medical Clinic. And her doctor's name was Madhu Reddy, who was an Asian Indian doctor. So those are the shifts that you see. Now, those shifts in ethnicity and identity are not seamless. They're not always peaceful. And that's one of the things we have to deal with. And you'll need to turn me off, but there still is within Cleveland a residual memory of the good old days, the industrial days. And we have to really convince ourselves that those are large. There's still industry here, but it's a changing scenario. It's the same thing that happened in Cleveland in the 1860s and 1870s when the old mercantile New England Cleveland was being overwhelmed by immigrants and industry. So this is another shift. We have to look at it in a broader historical perspective.
John, I just want to ask a quick follow-up question. Who is Henry Chisholm?
Henry Chisholm was a Scottish immigrant. He came from a town called, he came from Scotland, migrated to Canada, became a construction builder in Canada, came to Cleveland, got a construction job in the 1850s in building the docks on West 9th Street, and then partnered up with two Welsh brothers who had started a rolling mill, or actually an iron mill in Newburgh, that's Broadway and Harvard. He eventually took that mill over and turned it into the center of the iron industry in Cleveland. And that eventually would become part of American Steel and Wire, United States Steel, yada, yada, yada. But this is a man who came in with skills, ideas, and the willingness to invest and take a risk. You could say the same thing about John D. Rockefeller, born in the United States, but he came from Richfield, New York, and ends up in Cleveland. So this is what happens. People migrate here from within the United States, from without the United States. And A, they want a job, B, they want a venue in which they can apply their skills and perhaps better themselves and better the community that they're in.
Thank you for that, John. And I just think the story of Henry Chisholm is such a great hearts and minds story in terms of what we're talking about. On that point, Leen, we're so grateful. We know that you're in a little bit of a different time zone than we are. So thank you for being on this call with us here in East Coast time in the United States. Leen, would you talk a little bit about your own experience as somebody who's clearly in the economies that Jim and Richey are talking about, right? This isn't steelmaking, this is investment, this is finance. Super important things to Cleveland, super important things to the world. And here you are, this brilliant person doing what you're doing. And if you could tell us a little bit about that and kind of how it is boots on the ground here in Cleveland and where you currently are zooming in from.
Absolutely, yeah. So maybe I'll start my story 3 years ago and then kind of answer your questions with my story. So I graduated from Smith College, which is an all-women's institution in Massachusetts. I came from Amman, Jordan, where I currently am right now. And obviously, having graduated from Smith in the East Coast, you get lured to take opportunities in the East Coast. I ended up moving to Cleveland, and people always ask me why, but I had really strong connections to the community here, mostly through my alma mater, Smith College, and really through word of mouth and strong connections. I landed a job with Biomotive, which was founded by the founder of Global Cleveland, Beja Shaw, as well as an internship with the Cleveland Clinic, which I've always heard about and learned about and always wanted to work at. So I packed my things after graduating from Smith and moved to Cleveland. After a year and a half of working at Biomotive as a business analyst, I landed at North Coast Ventures, which Joe described in my bio earlier, is a venture capital fund in Cleveland, and have been there since. In January, in 2020, I was named as one of Cleveland's 20 in their 20s, one of the youngest on the list as well, and really have been civically involved in the community, supporting several nonprofits, and had long-term goals in Cleveland. Really wanted Cleveland to be home, had a lot of aspirations to one day bring my family and start my own thing. And my life changed a few months ago, back in March. And that's part of why I'm currently in Jordan right now, and why I'm here talking about my story. Basically, as someone who came on a student visa, you only get up to 3 years to work after graduating. And after the 3 years are over, you have to basically win this random lottery system called the H-1B in order to be able to extend your visa. Now, this random lottery system doesn't look at your qualifications, for those of you who are not very familiar. It doesn't look at your CV, your background, your employer, whether they really want you. It's just a random system that picks less than 20% every year, and it happens once a year in March. So I applied to that lottery 3 years, and I was never one of the lucky ones. So in March, I had basically 2 months left on my visa, and I was informed that I wasn't one of the lucky ones on the lottery. So I basically had to pack everything and leave the US within 2 months, after having been here for 7 years, having worked very hard, and obviously having built a career for myself in the country as well. So if you fast forward to September 17, today I am in Jordan, which is an outcome of that lottery. But a lot has happened since between March and September. I think if you put yourself in the shoes of my employer, North Coast Ventures, and any other employer could have said, at this point, you're too much baggage for us. You're inconvenient. We could find other US talent to employ. We don't need to be working with you, or thinking about what other options exist. But instead, they actually have been working with me since hiring me on the green card application. And that's part of why I'm hopeful to be able to come back, because I am on the track to hopefully one day get the green card and be able to come back. But they knew the risks that were involved. They knew that there could have been other US citizens that were talented, but they saw something in me, they saw my potential, and they wanted to take me. And because of North Coast, I am where I am today. I do have the hope to one day come back. But also beyond North Coast, I got a lot of support from the community, and that includes Global Cleveland. Joe and Nancy have been super supportive in helping me explore a lot of options between March and September, really fought the fight with me. A lot of community leaders, a lot of organization leaders went and advocated on my behalf. But the reality is I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one who was put in this situation forcefully. I'm not the only one who has an employer that really wants her, but because she wasn't one of the lucky ones in a random lottery system, had to leave the country. But so that's kind of the underlying factor in why I'm in Jordan and the struggles behind my situation. And I really want to encourage anyone here who's an employer or is a leader in an organization to think about one thing. When you screen employees, a lot of times you ask them if they require sponsorship. And if they say yes, a lot of them times they get filtered out. North Coast knew that I needed sponsorship, but they took the risk on me and they gave me the chance. And because of that, I am where I am today. So I want to encourage anyone here who is an employer, is an HR professional, is a leader in the community. When you recruit professionals for your organization and you think about people like me who are on visas, next time you look at that question and you filter them out, think about the opportunity cost of missing out on them and the fact that you could just be missing out on giving them a chance to change their lives and change the lives of generations to come. So Joe, that's just a kind of the background to your question. I hope that answered it.
Thank you, Leen. When you do come back, we will have a LeBron James Cavaliers championship parade like for you, because you will be bringing your talents from Amman back to the North Coast of Ohio, and we are hopeful and grateful. Jim and Richey, a living example of your plan, of your study, of our aspirations. And I want to ask you both, because Richey and Jim, there is a built-in counterintuitivity to what you've presented, right? The idea always has been get as many people here as possible, throw as much against the wall as you can and see what sticks. And yet what your plan is suggesting, and I'm wondering if you could talk about this in light of what Pittsburgh has, which is #1 in terms of international educated talent. Cleveland isn't far behind. We're in the top 10. And could you talk a little bit about that in terms of focusing on what's really important, which I think Leen is bringing out here in terms of who we focus on and how we actually go about getting the change to happen here in Cleveland so that we have Leen times 10. Richey?
Yeah, to back up a little bit to Jim touched on it, there's, everything, policies are rife with existential concerns. And, John talked about how when economies change, conflicts happen, and conflicts happen between regions, between people, and it creates a lot of geopolitical issues and political issues, and it ultimately impacts policies locally. And oftentimes that, for a place like Cleveland, that means we need to hold on to what we have. It becomes this kind of collective psyche of scarcity mentality, hold, you know who you know. And that is the opposite of what we want when it comes to innovation and knowledge transference. And so what Jim was talking about earlier, this idea that it's not really the brain gain versus brain drain. That's zero sum. That's a zero sum game. And that's the old game. It's really about brain circulation. You know, just like a fish tank that doesn't have oxygen, the system dies. It's the same thing for an innovation ecosystem in the city. You got to have circulation. And the only way you have circulation of a city is through migration. That is the biggest impetus of innovation in a city, is circulation of ideas, circulation of people, circulation of relationships. And its migration is the driver of that. And back in our report, it's no surprise that migration and human capital were the two biggest clusters that drove GDP per capita income increases for all the large metropolitan areas of the United States. It was human capital and the migration of that human capital. That's what drives economies going forward. I will let Jim kind of speak to that Pittsburgh component, but that's kind of the more conceptual and very visceral ways of how cities develop.
Jim, as you're beginning to answer this question, something really struck me, which was, John Grabowski said, we have to have people here willing to take a risk, right? He talked about Chisholm, he talked about Rockefeller. I'm talking about Ajlouni. And Jim, it seems like the appetite for risk is really part and parcel of what we're talking about here. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, Jim, in another study that you guys did, which was the Pittsburgh story, which is an interesting context for us to learn from. Jim?
Yeah, it's overall, I look at migrants or immigrants in particular as intrinsically entrepreneurial. So it's the very act of migration demands of the person to innovate on the fly constantly. How you adjust to a new community, trying out different avenues of opportunity. No is not an option. Run through brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. So it's not a happenstance that over half the firms in Silicon Valley are founded by immigrants. Just getting to the United States is a great innovative feat in and of itself. So the people who do get here, you're getting the cream of the crop, the best of the best of the best. And their ability to thrive is instrumental in their success. And they bring that to any company, they bring that to any region. They are the engines of economic transformation. So they're not just taking advantage of the opportunity in front of them, they are change agents. And, Pittsburgh, one of the interesting, if you will, trivial facts is the first Hindu temple in the United States was founded in Pittsburgh. And so there's a question of well, why? When it's a product of the change in federal policy and the 1965 Immigration Act, but it's because Pittsburgh was a locus of computer science and attracted a lot of Indian immigrants. And, and so that didn't really matter in the broad pattern of things in the country. But it's those immigrants that transform Pittsburgh's economy from steel to artificial intelligence. And, Carnegie Mellon itself has branch campuses in Silicon Valley, but also in India and other places around the world. They're connecting to other places via the people who've come to Pittsburgh to do research. And, if someone asked me why and how did Pittsburgh transform, I would, without hesitation, say immigrants.
Thank you, Jim. John, I want to ask you this question because one of the columns of light that shine forth in the study done by Richey and Jim and Rust Belt Analytica, and I'll quote, the influx of highly educated immigrants into the Cleveland metro has held steady over the last several years. And there's a table in the study that shows that. The total number of highly educated immigrants went from 21,000 to over 23,000. Cleveland's rate of immigrants with advanced degrees has stayed steady, hovering in the 21% range of the last 5 years. John, you work at Case Western, which is a big reason for that statistic. You study immigrants and immigration. Can you talk a little bit about that connection in terms of the importance of higher education, but also the immigrant community and why people like Leen, who has many options throughout the world, would choose to come to a place like Cleveland as a brilliant immigrant herself?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer in one sense. I think when we're looking at the infrastructure that attracts immigrants, if I look at the educational medical infrastructure, and I'll go way back, that is a consequence of, it's essentially money built under the industrial system. But that's something that demands change over time to keep current. So, universities are change agents. They need to innovate in their teaching and their courses, and they begin to attract students not only from around the United States, but now it's an international cadre of students. And I think that's one of the things that is bringing immigrants into Cleveland. I think the other thing that's bringing immigrants into Cleveland as well is the emphasis that we've put on innovation through think tanks, through entrepreneurial training centers, trying to kickstart a new economy on the basis of the old economy, looking back and saying, in the late 19th century, Clevelanders were getting, God knows how many, useful patent applications. We need to do that again. But they're looking beyond and into areas that were, basically based in universities. So if we look at Case Western Reserve University, if we go back to the Case School of Applied Science, which was at one time separate, that was established as an innovative institution, basically to train people in the sciences that were necessary for the industrial era. And then that moved later into computers. It's moved into the whole institution has. The medical schools here as well have been top rate, and they've been attracting people. So I think that's part of the basis of universities. But the other thing that's allowing us to do this is the movement, the change of immigration flow over time. And it's not just American law changes, it's the pressures of population, the communication that allow people around the world to shop for the best opportunity in terms of where they're going to go for an education and where they might be able to apply their skills. And I think that's what's really driven people not only onto my campus, but into Cleveland. I'd like to see that number of highly educated immigrants in Cleveland grow even further and faster than it does. And I'm hopeful that what we're looking at in a new economy will drive that. Again, one of the things I'd say, and it's a little bit off topic, but maybe it's not, is our tendency is to look with this old-fashioned lens of immigration of being largely heavy labor, people coming to save themselves, whatever else. That is in part true, but what we always miss is that immigration is people looking for a chance to apply skills and grow skills in new communities or in communities that they don't know. They don't have the chance at home, but they look at the United States and cities like Cleveland. And the more Cleveland's image grows internationally as a place where we're looking for highly skilled people, and the more that policy, that's important, that policy allows those people to come, the richer this city will become, and that will bring skill sets in. That's essentially it.
Thank you, John.
Joe, I wanted to piggyback
Yeah,
on, quickly is, thinking about Pittsburgh and what John just said, Carnegie Mellon's reputation abroad is much better than it is domestically.
Yep.
So you have, kids in India saying, where do you want to go to school? And they're saying Carnegie Mellon, and no one's saying that in the United States, right? So it's, they see it as a beacon of betterment, of improvement and opportunity. And Cleveland could be that too.
Thank you for that, Jim. Thanks for leading into my next question for Leen. Leen, one of the fundamental statements that comes out of the study is that there are two indicators of a city's progress. The first is GDP per capita, obviously. How well are we doing? What's our prosperity level? What's the economy look like? And the concentration of a place's immigrants with an advanced degree. Later in the study, it talks a little bit about Silicon Valley and about the artificial intelligence community, which over 55% of the job growth in AI-related occupations since 2000 comes from immigrants. You are a living example of what I just read. To the young woman who left Kabul 3 weeks ago and is on her way to Cleveland and is looking at a role model named Leen Ajlouni, beyond the visa nonsense and the bureaucracy that is immigration, what would you say to that young woman who is a Leen in waiting?
Honestly, Joe, it really comes down to the community, the way you feel supported, the way they, I mentioned earlier that Cleveland fought the fight with me when I was going through that immigration situation. And that's why I want to come back to the US. And Joe, you mentioned earlier, I have a lot of options. I actually got job offers from the UAE, from the UK, from Europe. I very much could change my track and go immigrate somewhere else. But the fact that I saw Cleveland's potential, I feel very connected to it. It gave me something. My employer took a chance on me. I want to give back. And I felt the support of the community. I felt like I had a family, despite the odds, despite the risks or the unfortunate situation that the political situation led to. But at the end of the day, I want to come back because I do have that support. So I would encourage, the future Leens or anyone in my seat to really find that community, to find that second family, to make that city home. And I think we all play a big role in that. If it wasn't for my Smith community, I would have never heard of Cleveland. I would have never come here. If it wasn't for Beju's background and the way he was very compelling to me, he was very influential, very inspirational, and he continues to be a role model for me. So if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have seen Cleveland's potential and how that, connects to my aspirations and my interests. So for me, it's really about finding that community, finding that role model. And then through those connections, you really can get around the system and get around the rules. As hard as they can be, there's always a way you can get around them if someone can help you and take a chance on you.
Well, Leen, you're obviously embodying a t-shirt that we're going to have printed that says Global Cleveland, no is not an option. And Jim Russell, we will give you credit for that one, but Leen, we should put your face on that. It's interesting, Leen, because you called out Beju Shah, one of the founders of Global Cleveland, now the chair of the Greater Cleveland Partnership and the son of immigrants himself. I'm thinking about Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, led by the unbelievable Tanya Maness. With a great staff, right? Candace, Colin Gilson, the whole group of people who are really bringing Cleveland back neighborhood by neighborhood. She's born in India. And so what you're speaking to really, really tells that story. I'm going to ask a question, John, real quickly to you. This came through on our message board. The panel should address this, but this is really important because this conversation is important. It shouldn't necessarily be comfortable. And I'll reference you to other conversations we had this week that are important and uncomfortable. John, how should we speak to the institutions that work with the overall community, the community of people born here and the people who were born abroad, to make sure that the current citizens that we have, a citizenry right now that is majority minority, majority African-American, Latino, majority poor, people who wonder, what about us? What about me? And ask that question rightfully and righteously. How do we make sure that if there is some sense of a pushback, that what we're trying to do is improve the lives of everyone, people who are already here, as well as people coming here? And then how do we knock out this fact of being one of the cities that have such a high poverty rate? John, I'm sorry for landing that on your lap, but you're a guy that's used to hard questions. John Grabowski.
Yeah, that is a difficult question. And that has been a constant, if I can reference historically, that's been a constant question about the arrival of every new group. The group that has a different skin color, group that has a different religious basis, that from the majority within the city, there's been pushback against that constantly. And right now, that pushback is understandable, given the poverty situation in Cleveland, given the situation of segregation in Cleveland. And it is that the only way I think that can be solved is internally to begin to promote education through the broad community, to try to get everybody up to the same level, because otherwise we're going to be looking at highly skilled people coming from abroad, working with people who could have been highly skilled if the city provided the right impetus for them, kept them in school, whatever you want to say, to make them competitive. So it can't, if it continues to be an us versus them equation, we're right back to the late 19th century. We're right back to the point in the 1920s when we passed quota laws on immigration. And I'm not just talking about racial issues here. I'm looking at race broadly. So it's, it's, the boat has to rise for everybody.
Thank you, Richey and Jim. One of the panels that I was referring to earlier this week that we had was our the Black community and the Asian community in Cleveland, and specifically, how do these two communities that have been under such pressure, and in some cases under attack, right? I'm thinking, John, about what you taught me about the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? That was really only changed in the 20th century in terms of how we discriminated against people who were Asian, mostly the Chinese community, because of who they were. Clearly, we're dealing with 500 years of segregation, racism, and trying to become an anti-racist society with regard to our African-American sisters and brothers. But one of the things, Jim and Richey, that you talked about, and in the plan, I'm sorry, I keep going back to this page, where you talk about migration as economic development in terms of the indicators, you talk about graduation rate, status, or cohort. And it feels like what you're talking about is we can't do this alone. The myth of solitary success is a myth. And it really has to do with the entire community or cohort rising with you. To Leen's point about community, Richey, what the heck did that mean in that table that you did that continues to draw me?
So, and I want to go back to the question you asked John too, because I think it's an issue that it's a tough issue, but it's really important to unpack this. But to your particular question, the feature with the highest predictive power on GDP per capita growth was the extent a region graduates local high school students in their graduation cohort. So this means, not graduating 7, 8, 9, 10 years, or not graduating at all, but graduating within 5 years. So that, number one, speaks to the efficacy of the higher ed institution locally, but it also speaks to the efficacy of CMSD. So you're not going to graduate in 5 years if you're not prepared. So there's this, and that was the strongest predictor of GDP per capita, the efficacy of the local higher ed system. We're not talking the Carnegie Mellons, we're talking the Cleveland States. Now, to get to the tougher question, innovation is needed. We're not going to go back to the horses and plows. There's no way evolution is going to devolve. So innovation creates industry compositional changes. We've talked about this, going from labor to knowledge intensive. Industry competition, it affects firm births and firm deaths. So the amount of companies that are growing and dying. That relates to the amount of jobs a region has. So job growth, job decline. That relates to the amount of labor force participation is happening within a region. That relates to income. So these innovation is upstream, but it tackles and it touches everything downstream all the way to the paycheck in everyone's pocket. So that's important. Number two, why is there an issue then with innovation, and why are we having these issues of bifurcation and inequality in the US? It's pretty simple. We did a study and it showed that the most innovative regions, the most prosperous regions, think Washington, DC, Silicon Valley, they also had the largest gaps, per capita income gaps between blacks and whites. So the more innovative you are, the more prosperous you are, the more disparate you are. That's a problem. And how are you going to tackle that problem? Well, it's probably not going to be through migration policy. It's going to have to be through some broader policy nationally that gets to redistribution, number one. Or the idea that we've been talking about is, well, what are you innovating about? What are you innovating on? What are you trying to do? You trying to make Angry Birds 3D version just to create more money for the software apps? Or how about we innovate and actually tackle everyday problems for people? How about we innovate towards health disparities? How about we innovate in ways we redistribute food at food banks? How about we innovate in ways to do lead abatement? How about we actually put innovation and talent to solving the everyday problems that could actually grow human capital from the ground up, instead of putting innovation that just enriches folks in the consumer tech industry or the Uber Eats industry and all these other kind of consumer tech kind of products. Put innovation toward actually helping people, and that'll probably close the gap a lot better than what innovation is actually put towards, at least out of Silicon Valley.
Jim, you want to add anything to that, especially the question about how we kind of bring our tale of two cities together?
Yeah, I'll answer that by engaging in counterfactual. So we, talk about immigrants and no, it's not an option. There's a neighborhood in Toronto, in Canada, that it's full of people from Portugal, so Portuguese neighborhood, and they're very isolated. In fact, they have their own school there. There's not a lot of English spoken, not a lot of French spoken, mostly in Portuguese. It's the poorest neighborhood in all of Toronto. So, so here we have dynamic immigrants, no is not an option, moving across the Atlantic to a new place. And they're not integrated into the overall community. And that's true for immigrants and domestic populations. The more isolated you are, the poorer you are. So show me a neighborhood where no one's leaving or no one's moving in, and I'll show you high poverty rates. So, the interaction with the broader community, being part of a broader labor market, engaging people you don't know who might tell you about a job you otherwise wouldn't have heard of. This is instrumental to lifting all boats. That it's, if you have a health tech corridor where all this great innovation is going on, but it's not filtering out to the rest of the city, it's not connected, people aren't moving in and out to the region, you're going to have a place that's an entrepot. It's the global part of Cleveland that's not a part of Cleveland. And you have to take your global neighborhoods and connect them to all the neighborhoods. That will lift people up.
I am so happy we were taping this thing, because you guys are blowing my mind away. That is so astounding. And Richey and Jim, I'm not trying to get more work for you, but I have a question that I'm going to keep in the back of my head, and you don't have to answer it. But the biggest criticism of this past election was voter turnout. And I'm curious about isolation, voter turnout, and prosperity, but that's for another study. You guys are just making my mind reel. I want to ask John and Leen this question. If Cleveland is doing so many things right for immigrants and immigration, Jim and Richey put it right there: educated, meds and eds, the whole 9 yards. We know how important it is, right? To Jim's point, we know how important integration is and heterogeneity, right? What is making Cleveland a destination, John and Leen, for people born outside the US? What is actually making us a not destination? And the question that came from somebody on our call line was, is the problem with the story, or is the problem with how we're telling the story? John?
Oh, I think the problem is partly with the story. And I think that Jim and Richey were talking about that. Cleveland is a city of nodes, and nodes defined by race, nodes defined by prosperity, occupation, whatever else. And I think it is difficult to get any what I term cross-cultural conversation going in that way, to share stories and begin to make people feel like they can move up and out. This is somewhat old, but I'll reference it anyway. I'm a historian. John Adams High School at one point was the most integrated high school in Cleveland. It had first generation ethnic people, it had other people, and it had a substantial African-American population from Mount Pleasant. And some studies of that school looking at those cohorts that graduated because they knew one another shows great degrees of success when they went out, at least as much success as African Americans could achieve given the segregation at that time. That was something the city attempted to do with busing, but busing resulted in what some people would argue with white flight. So, that was going to get students of different backgrounds studying together and try to begin, I think, to fertilize not only cultural exchanges, but educational exchanges and dream exchanges, if you will. I don't have an answer for that. That's one of the, I'm at a university where we're super integrated in terms of who's here, but, it's a monetary issue and it's a wonderful place. But when I walk out, I see a city that is still block by block. And that, I think, we need to talk to one another. We need to show examples to one another. We need to basically share stories with one another, not at special meetings, but on an everyday basis on the street, in the neighborhood, and in the store. That's how it works.
Leen, John, you guys are all, I swear to God, I want to take a class from each of you. Leen, John talked about dream exchanges. I'm going to try to interpret that. That's the idea, John, of sharing our hopes and dreams with each other, regardless of where we came from, right? Okay, Leen, what's the dream exchange like in Cleveland? Well, why? So you came here from Smith, an unbelievable institution. From Jordan, you chose Cleveland. People think that you're a living example of counterintuitivity. How do you talk about this disparity that Richey and Jim talked about and still continue to make Cleveland a place that at the end of the day is +1 because we're plus Leen?
Honestly, Joe, I think it goes back to what you said earlier, which is story. I think when you tell your story, you're able to influence, you're able to inspire, you're able to show someone who could be like you that you could do it too. Like I was able to do it, so you could do it too. I think for me, if I didn't know anyone else who was, who went to school in the East Coast, who was on a visa and wanted to come to Cleveland, I might have not ever thought about Cleveland. So for me, having known someone who was like me on a visa, comes from the Middle East, graduated from Smith, who moved to Cleveland, that automatically just made me more compelled to come here. So I think story goes a long way. It also has the potential, I think, for the flywheel effect or virality, right? Like the more people you see like you, or the more examples you have, the more people you will see of them. So I think we need to build better examples, better role models, and we need to share those stories broader. I think to your point, John, earlier, just about kind of how do those stories begin? I think a big part of it is the entry point. And for me personally, I think a big part of it is universities, the role that they play. We talked about Carnegie Mellon before. If I think about Case, maybe John, you can correct me, but I think 40% of the population is international. And that seems like a significant number. But I think if you were to break that down, a significant portion of that comes from a specific demographic or a few countries. It's not very diverse. You don't see a lot of people from the Middle East or from Africa. So there tends to be disproportionate, I think, even populations of different regions of the world. And that's probably because there's financial hurdles, or because there aren't a lot of people from the Middle East who went to Case, so they're not telling these stories to people in the Middle East. For me, having gone to Smith, it's because I knew someone from Jordan who went to Smith, and she told me about Smith, and that's how I applied. So I think it always goes back to the story, and the way we tell the story, I think, is really important.
Thank you so much, Leen. I really appreciate
it. If I might add a
John,
personal note to this, when I taught in Turkey, I taught at Bilkent University, and Bilkent University was really international, a large cadre of Turkish students, but also students from Europe and from the broader Middle East. And Bilkent has really risen in terms of its ranking. And so it was doing that cohort and moving people out. And most of the students were, they were doing graduate work at Bilkent, but then they wanted to get to the US to do graduate work there. Yeah. So that's, universities can be really good incubators. But the question we have is, how do we get people on the streets of Cleveland into a university? That's what Tri-C and CSU were established for, was to give an affordable education. And we just have to continue to do that. Otherwise, we'll be stagnant.
And it seems like what everyone is saying, in terms of GDP and foreign-born talent and the importance of local talent, and that local talent and foreign-born talent, together coalescing is a big reason why places like Say Yes, had such a big push which was to get kids to college, which was to figure out how do we get rid of the obstacles, for my neighbors who grew up on East 74th in St. Clair, who were African-American, Puerto Rican, and Appalachian, like for the students who might be coming to CASE from places like Jordan, India, and China. So I really appreciate that. Concluding session here. Richey, what's the one thing you want people to take away from the plan?
Well, I mean, it goes back to a little bit of the last comments I had, is this whole idea that, we're going to innovate and we're going to be inclusive. And where does migration and immigration play a part in these two goals? I mean, I call it the paradox of progress. So right now, the way the cards are, or the way the deck is stacked, it's stacked towards efficiency, it's stacked towards companies, it's stacked towards profit, and it's tilted away from workers, it's tilted away from communities, it's tilted away from neighborhoods. And so it's really hard to do this bottom-up approach of saying, well, we're going to upskill people. Upskill them into what? We're going to upskill them into this kind of tattered American fabric, so to speak. So until we look at really, what's the goal here? What's the aspiration of the country? What is the outcome? Is the outcome variable, like we said, GDP per capita, or is it well-being? Is it life expectancy? What's our value? Is value profit, or is profit just part of a broader value system as it was in a different time in this country? So I know that's a little bit bigger than this panel, but it's an issue that we're dealing with as a country, as residents, as migrants and non-migrants alike. And you can innovate, but what are you innovating towards? And it could make things worse. And we're always going to have this problem of natives, non-natives, whatever terms you want to use, until we deal with these issues that are much bigger from a macroeconomic and geopolitical policy.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Richey. Thanks for your work and your light. Jim?
I think the main takeaway, and this is, not just from the study, but sort of my broader experience with migration. The focus needs to be on who and what already exists in Cleveland. Who is there? And so a lot of assets, a lot of opportunity and potential already is there. So I'm listening and hearing Leen's story. So what is it about Smith College, that would bring someone of that caliber to Cleveland? That's an existing asset that could be better leveraged. Now that we're made aware of it, so we're listening to the stories. Once you're made aware of the story, what can you do with that story? What can we do with Smith? And, other people like Leen living in Cleveland, who are they? What are their stories? And what are the opportunities we could glean from those stories? And, and so it's not just people who have moved here, but it's people who have lived here for generations. What are their stories? What are their aspirations? When we think about the main predictors, migration and education, there's a lot of focus on education, but I'll flip it around. Education is the proxy for migration. So if you can't move another place, education is the way to approximate that experience. So people who don't want to move, people who cannot move, we need to educate them so they have the benefits of opportunity that migration brings.
So much, Jim. Thanks for your great work on this study. John, Dr. Grabowski?
Oh, I'm totally in concert with Jim and Richey. I think Richey's comments about reorienting our goals as a nation and a society are absolutely, they're central. We need to do that. But I think there's a simplistic word I'll use, and it's change. And I think we have to be not afraid of change. We have to embrace change as something that happens all the time. We have to prepare ourselves for it. We have to find out the best way to ride with it, not only to make our lives better, to make the community better. That's the interesting thing about history. If things didn't change, there'd be no need for historians. I'd be out of a job. And that's the story of who we are. So things are going to change for the better and for the worse. We have to see that. And I think there are very positive things that can happen. We've been talking about this, and so just can't stay stuck where we are. Otherwise we will stagnate.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks for your incredible work and for just being such a voice for so many different people. It's truly an honor to know you, and I can't believe you're in Cleveland. The future is Leen. Leen, guide us. Take us to our next place and destination, Leen Ajlouni.
You know, Joe, I think with every success immigrant story, it always starts because someone gave them a chance. For me, if I didn't get a full scholarship from Smith, I would be in Jordan, probably an engineer, just another young woman who's, working, no future, no big ambitions. But because I got that full scholarship, my life changed, my dreams changed, right? So Smith took a chance on me, and then I came to Cleveland, North Coast took a chance on me. And if it wasn't for both, I don't know who I would be or where I would be right now. So I think we all agree it's not a problem of talent or potential. I think even when it comes just to entrepreneurship, immigrant residents are 38% more, have more potential to start a startup than a US born resident. So if we have the potential, we have the talent, what's missing? I think it's a change of giving chances. I think if you give a chance to an immigrant, you're going to give a chance to a future and a generation of children and future families. So it's a life-changing decision.
Thank you so much, Leen. Thank you, Leen Ajlouni. Thank you, John Grabowski. Thank you, Jim Russell. Thank you, Richey Piiparinen, for a most amazing conversation about immigration, migration, our city that we love, and the people who are the reason why we love it. I want to thank our speakers who are absolutely extraordinary. I want to thank RTA for hosting John Grabowski and I on a day-long tour of the city. Please go to our website to see the entire full interview, mostly featuring John, which is why you should tune into it. It was really amazing. I'd also like to remind everybody we have an amazing drawing happening in the next few weeks and months for a trip to Italy. Please go to our website and see that to visit our sister city, Vicenza. And we want to thank our sponsors. We want to thank Italian Tours and Travel by Diana, who made that trip possible. We want to thank the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Cleveland Water Department, K&D Group, the United Church of Christ, Katniss Classics, the City of Shaker Heights, Cleveland State University, Cuyahoga Community College, the Cuyahoga County Public Library, Dealer Tire, Downtown Cleveland Alliance, Greater Cleveland Partnership, RPM, Swage Lock, the Cleveland Marathon, brought to you by Union Home Mortgage and Jack Staff, Welcome House Incorporated, Platform Brewery, AMS, Medical Mutual, Mitchell's Ice Cream, Grants Plus, the Cleveland Transformation Alliance, Mansur Gavin Law, Margaret W. Wong and Associates Law, Midtown Cleveland, Neighborhood Family Practice, the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland, the Cleveland Foundation, the City of Cleveland, and Cuyahoga County. I want to remind everybody that we have a busy day today, including at noon, hearing from the Federal Trade Commission on the importance of consumer protection and how immigrants and refugee and entrepreneurial newcomers can make sure that they are using the power of the federal law enforcement system to help their business and some of the things that they can do to make sure that they are able to succeed in every way with our speaker, John Steiger. I'd like to thank you all for being part of this session today. Again, I want to thank our speakers. Happy welcoming week. Happy week, everybody. Thank you so much for your participation and for what you do to strengthen our city by welcoming our world. Have a good day and a good weekend, everybody.